What's up, everybody? This is Steve Sterlacci, and today I want to talk about the question that I have been getting quite often. If you have seen any of my videos, you'll know that I am a Helix user, a Fractal FM9 user, and also a Neural DSP Quad Cortex user. Why? Because I have problems, but that's for another video. So for the past 3-4 months or so, I've been adding the Quad Cortex and the FM9 into my rigs and really trying to get my head around how to use them, how to get good on them, and I wanted to really do that for content for YouTube and potentially easier travel for certain gigs, or maybe I prefer one for certain gigs. They're all great, all of them. All three are really excellent units, and I want to talk today because I've been battling this like annoying wrist thing. I think it's like a tennis elbow, but it's like creating swelling in my wrist, and my fretting hand has been like a complete mess. So I don't plan on playing. I'm trying to take it easy. So I figured it'd be a good opportunity to discuss and talk about some of the main differences and whether or not the FM9 in particular is going to be able to replace my Helix in my touring and professional life. The FM9 is incredible. It sounds incredibly good. It sounds probably better than the Helix does right off the bat. Once you pull things up, it sounds better, and then you can just infinitely tweak the FM9 until you're happy. And if you can't find happiness with all those parameters and stuff, then I think you are the problem. But I also feel the same way about the Helix. The Helix has tons and tons of parameters in it too, but I almost feel like it's a little redundant how much stuff is in the FM9. I love it. There's nothing wrong with that. But for someone like me, I have a pretty good understanding of this stuff. And for most people, I would assume that's not the case because there's some really advanced stuff in there. And a lot of people, when they move to a modeler, just want to be able to plug in and have great sounds. As somebody who, prior to digital modeling, was very basic, few pedals and 1 amp, I don't want to have to deal with all of the in-depth things because you'll hear something, you'll be like, I want to make an adjustment. And then you start thinking, okay, well, where do I want to make the adjustment? And there's just look at this in FM Edit here. We have all of these pages and pages and pages and pages of parameters that you can adjust. Whereas say on the Helix, for example, you just have regular, the regular run-of-the-mill stuff. And I talked about this in my more in-depth comparison of the two, where I discuss a little bit more in detail about, comparing these side by side. You really don't need all the pages and pages of stuff with the FM. I mean, you can just look at the ideal page is probably the maximum that you'd ever actually really want to use. But again, overall, I think as far as tones go, I do think that the FM9 will sound a little bit better, but I still don't think that it's able to replace the Helix in my life. So assuming we're bypassing the dialing in phase, okay? That's all well and done. So say you spent time dialing in the FM9, you spent time dialing in your Helix, all of those are out the window. The things that I don't like about the FM9 that I do like about the Helix, I touch on this in that video also. I don't like that FM9 lags behind. So if you look at FM9, edit, you can hear that I'm changing to a scene, and you can see how slow the software is when I'm making these changes. And something that came up also was this is not reflected on the floor unit and audibly. So when you're plugged in and playing this, when you step on it, it happens. Whatever the changes are happen immediately on the unit. But if you're using the FM9, you're kind of highly dependent on FM9 edit, and having it visually in front of you is really unusual sometimes when you see it lag behind, and it really it's a workflow killer for me. If I think that I'm hitting one of the drive pedals on and off, and it's just not happening on the screen, it kind of freaks you out. You got to just trust that it's happening on the unit. Editing on the unit is quite abysmal, and it's not as visually obvious to do things as it is on the Helix. So that's number one. I wouldn't say it's the most important, but it's definitely something to consider when you're doing it. You get used to it on the FM stuff. Again, I still use it and I still love it, but it's definitely something frustrating that comes with using the Fractal. And for example, when you're on the Helix, I'll just show for comparison's sake, you see all the changes are able to happen pretty seamlessly with no issue at all. And the software doesn't lag behind. The software is right there with the hardware. And all the changes are reflected immediately, which I feel like makes sense. I mean, that's what I'd rather have. I'd rather not have a laggy software. And now really the main thing I wanted to talk about in this video is the scene controllers versus snapshots. And for me, snapshots are the main reason why I chose Helix in the first place. Snapshots are like the greatest thing to have ever happened to a guitar tone. So in the Helix, you have, here you see 8 snapshots. And what snapshots are presets within your preset. So you have your full master built rig, your beautiful ideal rig that you've been dreaming of your entire life. You finally built it in one thing. What Snapshots allows you to do is to change, bypass, engage, literally do whatever you want. And as far as the FM9 goes, you can also do the bypassing and the engaging of things. But what separates the Helix is that you see all of these parameters that are in the white brackets. Okay, everything that's in a white bracket here are all being changed using snapshots. So you can see that there's a ton of stuff in just this preset alone that, and even just on the amp, there's plenty of parameters that are being changed all throughout the snapshot changes. And this is where, you know, the Helix having less parameters, but having this type of flexibility where for each individual snapshot, I can have a completely independent set of amp sound dialed in. So I can literally have any parameters on my amp changed per snapshot. And it's all seamless and gapless switching. So I can have my amp set to a clean setting, and then I can have it set to a crunch, a dirty, an even heavier, and a maxed out gain. And each one of those can have its own separate bass, middle, treble, presence, channel volume, and different levels of sag. And you can do up to 64 parameters or bypass assignments within one single button press. That is like insane, and it's super, super flexible. And I think that this kind of surpasses all of the super in-depth menus of the FM9, because with the FM9, you are stuck having what's called scene controllers. Now I'll go over to here, over to FM9 Edit. And when you have scene controllers, you have this menu up here that's controllers, and you have scene controllers 1 and 2. So you see here we have 8 scenes under the scene controller. So scenes are the same thing as snapshots in the basic principle, if you want to call it that. They can bypass a bunch of things, they can enable a bunch of things, and they can tweak some parameters. But you see here we have scene controllers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So on the FM9, we have 4 scene controllers. And now you see up here, it's in percentages. So if I were to go to my amp block, any of these that have the yellow circle right there, all can be controlled using scene controllers. On the Helix, it's the same way. You can pretty much use, I don't think there's any parameter that's not able to be used in snapshots. But now say, I'm going to remember this. I have 2.78, okay? 2.78, that's going to make a difference. So when I now go to right click that, I'm going to go to my source, and now I want to select what I'm going to control this with. And I am going to select scene controller 1. Okay, so now scene controller 1 is going to control this gain or this drive. And now you see it went to 0. Why did it go to 0? Because my controllers are all set to 0. So now if you had it dialed into the perfect spot and you just enabled a scene controller, it's going to revert to 0. So now let's make this 27.8 because I had it at 2.78. Is that where it was? Either way, whatever it is. And now you are able to change this per scene and do it on a percentage base. So I'm just throwing in some arbitrary numbers here. Nothing really matters here. These don't have to be in any sequential order either. But now, so I've set my scene controller. So in all my scenes 1 through 8, my drive level is now going to change according to what scene is selected. And now you see this doesn't lag. This goes right away. Okay, and that's all well and good, right? Life is good. But that's it. I mean, you can't control, you can put other things, you can set other things to the same controller. So if I were to right click on my drive pedal, for example, oh, no, if I were to go to my drive pedal and say I wanted to change the tone based on different scenes, I can also set this to its own separate scene controller. But again, I only have 4 of these. So if, for example, just something that you can do, if I set this to scene controller 1, guess what? It is now stuck with the exact same percentages as the other one. So you're locked into this unusual percentage system, which, I mean, I understand it and I get it, but you have to really be selective with how you use it, and you have to be kind of strategic with this. So let's unassign that tone. And say we're going to go to our reverb here. Say that you're maxed out, you used all 4 of your scene controllers, but you also want to you want to use this as you know what, this might be the easier one. Let's do time. So here you have the time. This is how long your decay is going to be on your reverb. So I'm going to set this also to scene controller 1. And now again, this is just arbitrary stuff here just for you to look at. So you can see all the seconds are changing according to the scene, and they're obeying the same percentages as the drive knob. Now, obviously having a reverb of 100 seconds, a reverb decay of 100 seconds is a little bit ridiculous. So something you can do here is you could take your max value and you can set this to, what's the max amount of reverb trail you'd ever really need? Maybe 10 seconds or so. So now it's going to go from 0.1 seconds to 10.51. And now that is your new boundary. And now the percentages will obey those boundaries. So from 0 to 10.5 seconds, we're going to call it 10 seconds just for simplicity's sake. Now for the scene controllers, which are these percentages, this will be the percentage out of 0.1 seconds to 10 seconds. So instead of at 100% in scene 8, you'll see the reverb time goes to 10.51, which was my maxed out value, and then everything else will obey the percentages as they are set in the scene controller. Does it sound like a lot? Isn't this crazy? I get that it's super flexible still. I get that this is just insane how much work needs to go into, thinking about this stuff and having to do the math. And like I said, that's only 4 parameters that you can do this for. Otherwise, you have to start finagling your way through and finding other parameters that will obey those same percentages, that same increment. So if you do 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%, quarters, right? Zeros to 100 and with your in quarter increments. Every parameter that's assigned to that controller must obey those percentages. And if any of that didn't make sense, you can do some research on scene controllers. It's a confusing topic. I understand if you didn't totally catch what I was saying about it, but you can ask questions in the comments and I'll try to get back to you once I can. So now something like the Helix, let's, how about this? I'm going to unassign these parameters from Snapshots. Okay, just remind me not to save this so I don't screw up my preset here. So now in the Helix, when you're working with Snapshots, again, you can do so many more things. You can do 64 parameters in one thing, and it's not limited to anything. So all you gotta do is right click on your value, click Snapshots, and now I can just move this wherever I want. Say I want this to be super low. And then I'm gonna go to a blank snapshot, and you see it goes back to that default setting where it was. I can max this one out. I can go to another snapshot. I can set it to there, go to another snapshot, set it to here. And now you can see that I'm able to control this with just snapshots, and it's just as simple as a right click and then set it to where you want it. With the FM9, you have to remember where your setting was and then translate that into a percentage and put that into your scene controller. And again, you can only do it for 4 parameters. So I can now even go into my drive block. This is just, a Minotaur, which is a clone. And I can now set this to be Snapshots too. And I can do the exact same thing where I can just page through, go to all different settings per snapshot. And now in these snapshots, you'll see it's bypassing things and it's changing the settings of this. I can do up to 64 per foot switch. And it's easy. Like all you do is right click and set it. So each snapshot is its own individual thing. And I think that that's not even close in flexibility compared to the FM9. Being able to do this with snapshots means that you can have every single sound dialed in exactly the way that you want it without having to compromise. And the only way to do this so far that I've found in the FM9 is to use channels. And now flipping back to the FM9. With the FM9, something that's really great is that you have channels of amps. So you can have 4 amps in a single preset, and you can control that with scenes where whichever scene you choose, you can also choose an active amp. But when you're switching channels within the amp block, the gapless switching goes away. So there's always going to be a noticeable gap in audio when you're switching from amp to amp. One last thing before we go. One thing that I like about the Helix that's a little bit, that I just like better in general, is that when you pull up a fresh preset is a completely fresh start. You have a blank floorboard and no assignments are automatic. When you go to the FM9, okay, so say you go to an empty preset in the FM9. Nope, that's not an empty one. See how slow the software is? I don't even know if I'm at an empty one. And then I go to my foot controllers. Whatever layout you have, and these are called layouts. This is actually really cool about the FM9. You have different views, if you want to call them, or they're called layouts, but each layout has its own set of assignments. And all of the foot switches are laid out in front of you for what you want. And what I would like is an option for a blank canvas. If I'm wrong about this, please, any Fractal users, let me know. I know that you have a per preset one, which I would think is per preset and it should be blank, but it seems like if I assign one, it goes to every preset. I would like one where it's totally blank and I can get a fresh start. All right, I think that's enough rambling for today. That is my thoughts on whether or not the FM9 is able to replace my Helix. And for me personally, I think the answer's got to be no. It's powerful. It sounds incredible, like super, super great. But I'm just way more comfortable on the Helix, and I think that snapshots really separate it and make it stand out. I think that snapshots are the greatest thing to happen to guitar sound in history, potentially, because it's just so infinitely flexible. So snapshots are going to keep me around with the Helix. I also think that the drive pedals in the Helix sound better. If you have an HX Effects or any of the HX Stomps and you're going into the front end of your amp, I do favor the drive pedals in the Helix over the drive pedals in the FM9, but I'll also favor the reverb. I'll favor the reverbs of the FM9, but I'm also not a reverb dependent player, so that's something to consider. I'm pretty basic with my reverbs. I have one rock solo sound that has, my like stadium type of reverb. Other than that, I'm pretty basic on reverb, but I'm an overdrive junkie. So I'd rather have better and more drive pedal options than for the reverb. All right, now that's officially enough. So thank you guys for checking out the video. Let me know your thoughts and comments below. Anything you agree with or disagree with, I'm sure you could find someone to fight it out with in the comments. And if you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.